the retail prices of meat and dairy would skyrocket. So a $5 carton of eggs would go to $13. A $4 Big Mac would go to $11. The problem with these externalized costs being imposed on society is that whether you eat meat or not, whether you're an omnivore or an herbivore, you are paying part of the costs of somebody else's consumption. So that when somebody goes into a McDonald's and buys a Big Mac for $4, there's another $7 of costs that's imposed on society. I'm paying that. You're paying that, whether you eat meat or not.
When you really look at who's benefiting and who's lobbied for this system of agriculture, it's the largest food producers in the country and the largest meat producers. And once they become so large and wealthy, then they can dictate the federal policies around producing food because they have so much political power.
Was this why Al Gore, even during his vice presidency, never addressed the issue of animal agriculture and failed to talk about it in his film, An Inconvenient Truth, or his organization, the Climate Reality Project? Was this truth just too inconvenient for even him? I felt let down by the man who inspired me on this entire path. I knew I needed to talk to an animal agriculture lobby group to see what they had to say. If they could silence the government, are they influencing and possibly have connections to these environmental groups as well?
Animal Agriculture Alliance, one of the biggest livestock lobby groups in America, has agreed to an interview. Greenpeace won't give us an interview, but Animal Agriculture Alliance has agreed to an interview. Now that is saying something.
People hear the word GMOs, and that's a really scary term. And again, I think agriculture has kind of struggled to explain what that means. But in reality, what we've done is to use technology to make advancements in how we raise crops and how we raise animals. We're not going to feed the world, going back to how it was 100 years ago where all the animals were, pasture fed. We didn't just move animals inside and just implement these large vertically integrated systems because of sustainability. It certainly reduces the environmental impact while improving animal well-being and food safety.
So they're saying that animals like it just as much being inside, say the chickens and the cows like being just as much inside as pasture grass-fed?
In a lot of cases, it's been a significant improvement in their well-being, just in terms of the amount of care they can get, individualized care.
Does the meat and dairy industry ever support or donate to environmental nonprofits?
I don't know that I would want to comment on that.
Yeah, I don't.
I don't know.
I don't know that we would know what they donate to or don't donate to.
Does meat and dairy industry ever support or donate to, say, Greenpeace?
Again, I don't know that I would feel comfortable.
Hey, sorry we didn't get back to you earlier. I have some bad news. Unfortunately, we are no longer able to fund your film project. We had a meeting, and due to the growing controversial subject matter, we have some concerns and have to pull out.
Why was this subject so controversial? The first person I could think to speak with was Howard Lyman, who had been sued by cattlemen for simply speaking the truth about animal agriculture on the Oprah Winfrey Show.
I was born on the largest dairy farm in the state of Montana in 1938. Grew up my entire life on a livestock farm. Went to Montana State University, got a degree in agriculture. Came back and started a mega agriculture endeavor where I had 10,000 acres of crop, 7,000 head of cattle, and about 30 employees. So I spent 45 years of my life in animal agriculture, and so I've been there, done that. When I was on the Oprah show, we had the food disparagement law. Now, the food disparagement law, in my opinion, was unconstitutional, but what it basically said, that it was against the law to say something you knew to be false about a perishable commodity. I didn't say anything on the Oprah show I thought to be false. I went there and told the truth. Now, it took 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to end up extricating myself from the suits from the the cattle industry. But if I was to go on the Oprah show today, say exactly the same thing today that I said back then, I would be guilty. And for me, when they were talking about the food disparagement law, it was the fact of whether I told the truth or not. You can go today and tell the truth, and you will be guilty. Because if you cause a disruption in the profits of the animal industry, you're guilty under the Patriot Act.
Do you think there should be any concern of us making this documentary?
Of course. If you don't realize right now that you're putting your neck on the chopping block, you know, you better take that camera and throw it away.
The animal agriculture industry is one of the most powerful industries on the planet. I think most people in this country are aware of the influence of money and industry on politics, and we really see that clearly on display with this industry in particular. Most people would be shocked to learn that animal rights and environmental activists are the #1 domestic terrorism threat, according to the FBI.
And why is that?
It's a difficult question to answer, why these groups are at the top of the FBI's priorities. I think a big part of it is that they, more than really any other social movements today, are directly threatening corporate profits. You know, when we try to find out how factory farms and how animal agriculture is polluting the environment, they try to claim exemptions to that information, either under national security terms or public safety, trademark issues, business. It's a business secret. We've seen all these attempts to keep people in the dark about what they're actually doing. You know, one of the largest industries on the planet with the biggest environmental impact, trying to keep us in the dark about how it's operating. Through the Freedom of Information Act, we obtained documents from the Counterterrorism Unit that show they were monitoring my lectures, media interviews like this one, my website, my book.
Are we at risk filming this and showing it?
You're going up against people that have massive legal resources. I mean, it's just overwhelming, the amount of money at their disposal, and you have nothing. And I think that fear is a big part of the tactic as well.
Will was right. I was scared. When I learned about the activists being killed in Brazil, I was disturbed, but I felt removed. But to learn about American activists and journalists being targeted by the industry and FBI, my funding being dropped, I was genuinely worried and it hit close to home. Was this why no one was willing to talk about the issue? I decided to take precautionary measures with all the footage I shot. I was beyond frightened to imagine what could possibly happen if I pursued this subject any further. It seemed the only decision to make was to put down the cameras and walk away. But then, I realized this issue was way bigger than any personal concern I could ever have for myself. This was about all life on Earth hanging in the balance of our actions, and that you either live for something or die for nothing. And I actually had no choice all along. I decided then to surrender not to fear from a secret, but rather to a cause towards truth. I couldn't be like these environmental organizations and sit silently while the planet was being eaten alive right in front of our eyes. I had to stand up and continue on. Some people would say the problem isn't really animal agriculture, but actually human overpopulation. In 1812, there were 1 billion people on the planet. In 1912, there were 1.5 billion. Then, just 100 years later, our population exploded to 7 billion humans. This number is rightly given a great deal of attention, but an even more important figure when determining world population is the world's 70 billion farm animals humans raise. The human population drinks 5.2 billion gallons of water every day and eats 21 billion pounds of food. But just the world's 1.5 billion cows alone drink 45 billion gallons of water every day and eat 135 billion pounds of food. This isn't so much a human population issue, it's a human eating animals population issue. Environmental organizations not addressing this is like health organizations trying to stop lung cancer without addressing cigarette smoking. But instead of secondhand smoking, it's secondhand eating. which affects the entire planet.
We're growing enough food right now in the world to feed between 12 and 15 billion people. We only have 7 billion people. We have roughly 1 billion people starving every single day. Worldwide, 50% of the grain and legumes that we're growing, we're feeding to animals. So they're eating huge amounts of grain and legumes. And in the United States, it's more like closer to 70, 80, depending on which grain it is, about 90% of the soybean.
82% of the world's starving children live in countries where food is fed to animals in the livestock systems that are then killed and eaten by more well-off individuals in developed countries such as the US, UK, and in Europe.
The fact of it is that we could feed every human being on the planet today an adequate diet if we did no more than take the feed that we are feeding to animals and actually turn it into food for humans. And so somebody trying to justify GMOs, that's like trying to give a drowning man a drink of water.
You can produce, on average, 15 times more protein from plant-based sources than from meat on any given area of land, whether it's using the same type of land, whether it's a very fertile area in one area of the world or it's an area that's depleted.
If we would reduce the amount of meat we're eating and dairy and eggs, we could allow all these monocropped fields of genetically engineered corn and soybeans to revert back to forest again, to be habitat for animals.
You know, anytime somebody tells you that we can't grow food for humans on the land that we're growing feed for animals, this is somebody that is smoking the #1 crop out of California. The fact of it is, if you can grow corn to stuff down the throat of an animal, you can actually grow corn and feed it to a human.
You encourage people to eat less meat and for the tremendous resources required and the toll on the environment.
And on the animal.
And on the animals.
And the workers in the system. And it's a brutal system at every level.
As the world population continues to grow to almost 9 billion people, do you foresee someday that we might just completely have to stop eating meat altogether?
I don't know that we'll completely stop. I think that the amount of meat eaten will decline. There's no way to support 9 ounces per person per day, which is what Americans are eating now. If the Chinese alone decide they want to eat that much, and they've decided they want to eat that much, we just can't. We don't have enough world to produce the grain to generate that much meat. I think a plant-based diet is the most sustainable.
But what do you recommend for 9 billion people can eat for the planet to not only sustain but to thrive? Would you throw out a number like an ounce, 1 ounce?
Oh, per meat?
And including dairy,
Yeah, I don't think I don't know enough. But yeah, it would be on the order of a couple ounces a week. It's not going to be the way we're eating it now. We're gorging on meat. We're eating huge amounts.
And does that include cheese too?
Yeah.
Total?
Yeah, cheese and milk.
Only 2 ounces a week seem like nothing. People could probably raise that in their own backyard. Maybe backyard farming was a sustainable solution.
I have 42 ducks. I started off with 3 ducks 3 years ago, and then those burdened into a population. I buy a 75-pound bag of seed. And that seed bag will last me right now about 2 weeks. The ducks now that we're going to be culling are about 2 years old. When you're living with them, they get used to you. They're not intimidated or whatever, and so they make all their vocal sounds like natural. Go down. Easy, 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 easy. Okay. Now we're going to keep you. Run. These 2 go first. Being smart-wise, compared to a chicken, they're probably the same. Yeah, he is.
I just can't do it. I don't think I could have someone else do it for me if I can't do it. If I can't do it, I don't want someone else doing it for me. And then sustainability, for sustainability, 75 pounds is 2 pounds per, so it's a pound per week per duck. 52 weeks, 110, so it's 110 pounds of food for 1 to 1.5 pound of meat. So on a sustainability issue, it's 100 to 1. And that grain gets, who knows where that grain comes from. But I mean, when it gets to this point, it's not even about sustainability. It was just, I don't feel real good inside. First time I've ever seen that. So, yeah.
I'd been so caught up in the destruction caused by animal agriculture, I realized I'd never truly dwelled on the obvious reality that every one of these animals was killed. It was always a disconnected, abstract fact of eating meat, but when it became personal, face-to-face, the story changed. I had already scheduled weeks in advance to film another backyard slaughter of a chicken that stopped producing eggs. I didn't know how I was going to possibly go through another slaughter, so I didn't.
Animal Place is a farm animal sanctuary in Northern California that focuses on rescuing animals from the animal agriculture industry. A lot of people don't realize that meat breed chickens, like this guy behind us, they're generally slaughtered at about 42 days old, whereas chickens that are bred for egg production are killed when their productivity starts to decrease, when they start laying less eggs. And that generally happens about 18 months to 20 months.
It doesn't matter if you buy caged eggs from hens on cage-free farms or free-range farms or pasture-based farms. Hi, Carol. It doesn't matter.
It turns out there's a successful movement of sustainable animal alternative food producers based right here in California, funded by big names like Bill Gates and Biz Stone.
When you imagine all those egg-laying hens eating all that soy and all that corn, you have an energy conversion ratio at about 38 to 1. Whereas alternatively, you can find plants. And you can grow those plants, and you can convert those plants into food. And the energy conversion ratio for the plants that we're using to replace the eggs is about 2 to 1, compared to 38 to 1 for eggs. So our explicit goal is to have the maximum amount of impact by creating this new model that makes the global egg industry entirely obsolete.
We're making the Omega products and proving that we can make better tasting food that's great for you, and it takes 1/20th of the land and resources that dairy do.
If I could tell you that you could have the fiber structure of meat, the satiating bite of meat, the protein, and all the nutritional benefits of meat without actually having animal protein itself. And by doing that, you could address climate change. You could address the human health epidemics that we're seeing. You could address animal welfare, and you could address natural resource conservation. Would you make the change?
But what if people just ate less animal products, like going meatless on Mondays?
When you go meatless on Monday, if you ascribe to that campaign, you're essentially contributing to climate change, pollution, depletion of our planet's resources, and your own health, then on only 6 days of the week. And